viragatabaya abhayam pratistam yada astikyantvidantu chinumana Rama Krishna dasavayam. Om labhyastapassaye atman samyagyanena brahmacharyena nityam antaha sharirehi jyotirmayo hi shubhraha yam pashanti yatayaha kshina doshaha. Om shantihi shantihi shantihi. The Atman, the indivisible self, in all beings, in all things, is realized by knowledge, austerity, veracity, and constancy, all of these constantly cultivated. When the seer beholds it, due to this practice, then he beholds it everywhere and in everything, existing here and now, even in this very life and body. Om peace, peace, peace. Via support and sustenance of the sadhus and the devotees, and correction of the adharmic and the wicked, and for the maintenance of the eternal Dharma, I embody myself forth from age to age. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Punaktu Sahaviryam Karvo Vahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidveshavanai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. In our recent classes here at SRV Hawaii and on the mainland, we've studied most recently the Advaita Vedanta series. We were calling it the Jnana Matra, the wisdom particle, and how that helps make thine eye single, how it develops the dual mind, turns it into single mind, and single mind into what has been called no mind, pure mind, and in the Sanskrit, of course, chit shuddhi, pure thoughts. So in that vein, we then followed it up with this series of classes, 4 to be exact, on the devotion of non-separation, which is actually now being worked on and posted on our website. It's one of those that will be added to the collection. And it also has for its theme, as the title suggests, Ananya Bhakti, or the devotion of non-separation, the idea of non-duality, or Advaita Vedanta. It suggests, as we were talking over the last series of 4 classes, 2 on the mainland and 2 here in Hawaii, that devotion and knowledge go together like 2 wings of a bird, and that the bird can't get off the ground without them. And so these 2 yogas that are sometimes by lesser thinkers or people of questionable philosophical understanding think that devotion and knowledge may be antagonistic to one another, that you should either follow just the bhakti path or just the jnana path. Or the same applies to the other 2 yogas. You should follow the path of inaction and be a monk, or you should follow the path of action and be a dharmic householder. But the idea of Purna Yoga, Purna means fullness, the fullness of yoga, or the idea of synthesis of yoga, how to make a workable and operable hybrid out of the four yogas. And also the idea of integral yoga. The phrase has been used to integrate them all successfully is more the idea, but when we come to the series of our talks that begin this week, this Sunday, and stretch on into the next 3 Sundays, we're calling it the Advaita of the avatars. And Advaita, that is, how do the greatest souls on earth who have come to earth, those who are usually or generally agreed upon to be of the highest awareness, the deepest consciousness, how do they look at synthesis and integration and so forth? They actually look at it, sahaja, as being very natural. Sahaja Tantra Siddhanta, they call it. It's a way of looking at things that they were never separate in the first place, that they were always and ever one, and that the only reason that the sadhaka or the practitioner or the seeker or the aspirant or the teacher, the guru, even the seer or the sage, looks into the integral parts of this one operable system is to take it apart and see its workings so that they can explain the workings to others. And we see that the avatar who comes to earth from age to age, as I just chanted, I come to earth for the destruction of the wicked, the resurrection of the Dharma, which means having to destroy aspects of the old Dharma that have become decrepit, and also to support the sadhus. Sadhunam dushkritam is the word. So those who are seeking, even like Swami Vivekananda, a contemporary sannyasin who has renounced the world both internally and externally, but who still works heart and soul to try and lift the world up to Brahman. He used to say, do not drag Brahman down to this world. Instead, turn matter into spirit, raise it up. Turn it into a matter of deification rather than condemnation. It was the old style. Yogi in the cave or sannyasin renouncing family and home did it quite often with an admixture of aversion. And that wouldn't lead to the highest goal. The highest it would lead to would be the abhava state. There's 2 great yogas, according to Tantra. Abhava yoga, which means the yoga of emptiness or no moods. Bhavas are like moods that come upon you. Oh, I'm in a good mood, or all of a sudden I'm in a formless mood, or all of a sudden I'm in a mood for devotion, or I'm in a mood for wisdom, I'm in a mood to meditate. Free of all those moods, abhava yoga. So that kind of healthy aversion, you might call it, or world weariness, does come upon people, and they do use it, practice it, and to their benefit. Then on the other end of the scale, there's maha yoga, which tends to blend what we were just talking about, all the 4 yogas. Action and inaction come together, knowledge and devotion come together, and then those 2 pairs also are put together into a composite. And when you see an avatar walking around on earth, usually the acclaimed ones, like we say, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, those beings who are at the head of their culture and their race and who are agreed upon to being illumined souls and who have left behind a great record that never dies, the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal truth. When you see those walking around on earth, that's what you see. You're seeing a beautiful amalgam of the 4 yogas based on the attitude and the idea that they were never separate in the first place. But when you come to a class and you're looking at the various dynamics of these different yogas and trying to assign them a space inside of you and trying to integrate them yourself, then you're working on the level of a different kind of siddhanta, a different kind of conclusion. You're not yet seeing them as integrally one because you haven't had the non-dual experience, which is the glue that holds them all together, the devotion of non-separation, as we were talking about. And until you have that nirvikalpa or asampragyata or nirvana or satori, that kind of experience at the highest level, then necessarily you must gravitate to that level. That's the level of knowledge and wisdom. Well, Krishna's great words, I come to sustain the sadhakas in this world, and then to destroy the adharmis, those who are not practicing the Dharma, who are actually antagonistic to it. And then overall to restore the old Dharma. He also says in the same Bhagavad Gita, from which those words are drawn, that one must know the end of knowledge in truth. So again, when you're attending Jnana Yoga classes, you're working on that knowledge which is transmuted into wisdom, which is then not transmuted at all. It's actually seen as a representative of the highest truth, which is already a fact of your existence. That truth thou art. Aham Brahmasmi, I am that truth. And that truth is Brahman, or Allah, or Almighty Father, or Buddha nature, or however you want to call it, by the different names assigned to it by these great knowers. They were knowers, they were lovers, they were meditators, and they were also actors. They were the greatest actors of all, putting on a body, coming here, having compassion for your suffering, which is actually, they know, unreal, and helping you to work out your karma, which is also equally unreal, because they are living in a karmaless state, an actionless state, a state in which action and inaction has been put together and fused, and which knows non-difference. It's the yoga of non-difference, or we looked at it a couple Sundays ago, the non-touch yoga. In Vedanta, in Sanskrit, that's called asparsha yoga, mentioned by Gaudapada in his great Karika, his non-dual Karika on the Mandukya Upanishad, which is only 12 slokas long, by the way, all on the word. You want to, if you're intrigued by that saying of Christ, this is Easter, so I should probably use some beautiful sayings of Christ. If you're intrigued by that saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, then you should probably look into the Mandukya Upanishad to see how Vedanta clarifies that saying of Christ, which, by the way, the direct disciples really didn't understand, the fishermen, when he said it to them. What's he talking about? In the beginning was the Word, and it was with God, and then it was God. How do I look at those three divisions, the A, U, and M of things? The Om, the Word. So the avatar is a manifestation of that word. I've said before, when you see Ram, you see Sri Ramchandra, he's got the Om sign painted on the palm of his hand, you see. And he means, when you see me, I'm the last form you will see, and then you will move into formlessness. That's why they sing such beautiful songs about Ram. They're legion songs, just to warm up the atmosphere here. Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Bhajamana Arana Bhavabhaya Dharana Nava Kancha Lochana Kancha Mukakara Kanja Pada Kanjaranam Shri Ram, Shri Ram, Shri Ram. You probably couldn't write a song like that, a bhajan, to a great avatar. The earliest of all avatars on record really is Ramchandra. He was even prior to Krishna. And Krishna is called the archetypical soul, this primordial soul, which is the overseer of all souls in India. So in another form earlier, Ramchandra was there, in another yuga. That's what he was just mentioning, yuge, yuge. And from age to age. So from age to age, I embody myself forth for those three reasons. That's the moniker of the avatar. Basically, in the Gita, it's usually referred to as the threefold teaching or message of the avatar. Number one, to sustain the devotees. How did Christ put that? If a man loveth his life, then he shall lose it. If a man hates his life, then he shall get it back in eternity. So basically, you should not cling to life. Patanjali told us that. Why should you not cling to life? Not only is it an attachment, but it's also a relative station you're clinging to. Not only is it a relative station, but as long as you cling to life, you'll never be able to make yourself qualified for or worthy for eternal life, because you're going from beginnings to middles and ends. You see, that's the problem with the word. And the avatars know the word inside out. They know that everything from in form comes from the word, and everything disappears back into the word. A is creation, U is preservation, and M is destruction. Or to put it more succinctly, A is projection, U is sustenance, and M is dissolution. Dissolution back into the source, so that it will come back again in another cycle. So in the beginning, as soon as you heard Christ say that, if you were an astute Jnani, like Shankaracharya's disciples were, would say, wait a minute, stop there, Lord. There is no beginnings. You already taught us that. There is no end. There is no middle. That's an appearance in Maya. So it's obvious that Christ didn't want his religion built on origins. He wanted it built on the Almighty Father, my oneness with the Almighty Father. He was a non-dualist. He was also a sannyasin who said, when they called him a peacemaker, said, I have not come to bring peace. I've come to bring a sword, and with the sword I will separate Father from Son. Why would he do that? Because the Father is interested in spiritual life and the Son isn't, or vice versa. You might have noticed oil and water don't mix, but neither do the spiritual people and the worldly people mix. They have their own areas of operation, and they're quite often antagonistic to each other. They're not going to fit like oil and water. So in this world, at least, you have to go by those distinctions, those separations, and the way that you know those separations is through viveka. Interesting word, since Swami Vivekananda named himself after it, but by knowing those distinctions as being different from one another. So first distinctions, and then you come to the idea of non-difference or non-separation. In other words, you have to know what you're not in order to know who you are. And if you don't have that real clear in your mind, you're always substituting Maya for Brahman, objects for Samadhi, people, personalities for principles. See? And you're always mixing it up. You're always having a poor admixture of those things, which aren't getting you realized, which aren't giving you insights. In fact, quite often taking you the opposite direction of enlightenment for lifetimes. So to come to bring a sword means, if he said, I've come to bring a sword, it means like Buddha's First Noble Truth we were talking about this morning after meditation. First Noble Truth is there is suffering. To me, that's exactly the same as Christ saying, I have come to bring a sword. Why? Because there is suffering. You want to separate yourself from the source of suffering, which is nature. You might have noticed that these great avatars don't suffer. That even when they have cancer of the throat or when they're on the cross, they don't suffer. They can transcend the body's suffering. Sri Ramakrishna had cancer of the throat. Somebody brushed against him on his deathbed, so to speak, and felt a thrill of joy run through his arm. And Sri Ramakrishna turned his head and said, "Oh, you rascal, you've discovered my secret." So they asked him, "Don't you feel that hole in your throat, cancerous hole in your throat?" He said, "Only when I talk to you. Otherwise, when you go away, my mind will go back to the lotus feet of Mother Kali, and I will be fine." So it's not just a teaching of morality or immorality or some promise of pie-in-the-sky bliss, things that it's been described at. It's a very practical thing. Vivekananda put it later, the only way that you will convince yourself of being not matter is to leave matter alone. If you can leave matter alone for an hour in your meditation, for a day in your retreat, or for a lifetime in your series of lifetimes, then you will learn the truth of formlessness, and you will be fit for the Brahman state. The avatars are seeing, looking, amongst the whole sweep of people, who's fit for the Brahman state. That's supporting the sadhakas, isn't it? They're here to support the sadhakas, so they have one eye of a triple eye fixed on that threefold teaching. The other, they're looking at the adharmis, which is to see if they're mucking things up for the seekers, you see, and also seeing if some of them might themselves get tired of doing evil actions, like Prahlada and some of the great seers of the past. Some of them were actually thieves and robbers and so forth, and they became great saints and seers just by meeting a guru on a path. It's an actual path leading through the woods, not just a spiritual path. The same, the two are the same, really. So there's the second eye fixed upon this amalgam of people called those who are suffering, those who are lowly, those who are oppressed, and those who are evil. That's a whole cross-section of suffering humanity that the avatar comes specifically to help. Like Vivekananda said, I love my God, the realized souls. I love my God, the devotees. I love my God, the poor. I love my God, the suffering. But I love my God, the evil, most of all. Don't try this at home, kids, as they say. But there's the great sacrifice of an avataric being. Vivekananda, they say if Ramakrishna had not been there, Vivekananda could have easily been the avatar of the age. That's how highly they hold him in regard. Millions of people hold him in regard. So this moniker, as I was calling it, of the avatars, has those threefold markings. And then, of course, the third being, I'm going to support this Dharma. That's the new dispensation. They were calling it that in Sri Ramakrishna's time, but somebody said, they're calling your teaching the new dispensation. And Ramakrishna says, I don't know anything about that. I don't even know what that means. But they were assigning all sorts of major titles to his descent. When the avatar comes, then, of course, people gather. He used different stories for that. He said, when the lotus blooms in the wood, the bees come of their own accord. They don't need an engraved invitation. Or he would say, a wonderful musical band blew into town. They set up their instruments, sat down, started playing the most beautiful music. And those that were there at the time got the most wonderful concert of their life. So they ran to tell their friends. And when their friends came to hear that music, the band had already packed up its gear and moved on to the next village. He's describing how the avatar descends from time to time, yuge, from age to age, into different time periods. Villages in this case would be this world, but it would be this world in different yugas, in different time periods. I mean, you can find about every 500 to 700 years a sign of these avataric descent. I was looking into the teachings of Moses recently. Actually, I had 3 new charts to present to you, but all the machines on the Hilo side of the island have broken down and I can't expand them for you, so I wasn't able to bring them, but I will bring them next week, even if I have to drive to Kona to find a machine that's working, and expand these so you can see them. But I was working on one chart called the Mahavakyas of the avatars. Mahavakya means great sayings. So I was inspecting the Zenavasta, and I was checking out the Song of Moses, and I was looking into the Quran and the teachings that Muhammad gave, and Zoroaster was considered avataric descent in his religion. Zoroastrianism almost gone now, although I was sitting next to a priest of the Zoroaster tradition on the plane a couple years ago. We looked at each other and, "Who are you? Oh, who are you?" And he turned out to be, his father was a priest of that religion, and he was also one. So I got to learn something about that religion in this day and age. So anyway, these great avatars in different religious traditions are of great interest to us because we're devotees of Ramakrishna and speak about a new dispensation. You're talking about the avatar's new threefold teaching. Why did he come? Basically to present the Divine Mother of the universe to us. That's one, because she's been hidden in all the other avatars. Rama and Sita wasn't considered a divine consort so much as she was just the wife of an avatar. Same with Krishna and Radha, and Muhammad and Fatima and other great couples. Christ and Mary, they were a divine couple together, father and daughter. Or father and mother and son. So basically this appearance of the avatar is usually accompanied with the Divine Mother reality, but she's always behind the scenes. So in this case, Ramakrishna came to introduce Mother Kali, the Divine Mother of the universe, to us, and brought Sri Sharda with him, a beautiful manifestation of the goddess. He said about her, she's a combination of Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Kali in this age. She's a triple manifestation. Tripura Sundari, the beautiful Sundari, Tripuri, 3-formed. So goddess of arts and learning, Saraswati, goddess of abundance, Lakshmi, beauty, and goddess of terrible, non-dual truth, non-compromising truth, Mother Kali, all put into one person. And we saw how retiring she was. I mean, they sang beautiful songs about her. Devim prasanam pranatarti hantrim yogindra pujam jugadharma patrim Tam Sharadam Bhakti Vijnana Datrim Daya Swarupam, and so forth. On and on in many verses. Mentions the Dharma, doesn't it? She, O propitious goddess, killer of misery and souls resigned, savior of religion in every age, by saints and sages worshipped, O motherkind. You see the connection? Those first three lines are the threefold dispensation of the avatar. I mean, didn't we just say, I come for the sadhus? So by saints and sages worshipped, O motherkind. And I come to sustain the Dharma. Devim prasanam pranatarti yogindra pujam juga dharma patram. Juga dharma patram. She's the mother of Dharma. And she's here to sustain it. So there's the second connection with the original Gita avatar, incarnation of Krishna. So whether you talk in terms of millennia ago or this present time, you have that definite teaching of the Matri avatar, Divine Mother. Many of these, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, if you look outside the door, you'll see the male pigeon. But the female pigeon is somewhere nearby. You just can't see her. So he meant these avatars come as males, but behind them is always that female principle, the Shakti. Because without her, as Ramakrishna said, without her I couldn't even lift my finger. He would stay in non-dual samadhi, but with her, she comes and makes his knowledge operable in the world. She wants to take that knowledge out, that wisdom out of Shiva, and Shakti wants to spread it broadcast amongst those people who are suffering mainly. So, yuge cha dharma sha, I spread the Dharma from age to age. So we have to understand this about the greatest incarnations. The idea about the avatars, they get what's called nowadays a bad rap. And we'd rather go for some non-dual seer who has nothing to do with humanity. See, oh, he must be the greatest because he has nothing to do with humanity. But the avatars take a risk. They come here and they associate themselves with the poor, the lowly, the suffering, and even the evil beings. And that's not going to look good in the eyes of a lot of the rest of the world. When Vivekananda set up the Belar Mat, built a temple for Ramakrishna and started holding Durga Puja and stuff there in the early days in Calcutta, then all sorts of people started coming. So some of the devotees got together with him and had a meeting and said, you know, there's some women of ill fame coming. They shouldn't be allowed to come to the temple. And Vivekananda said, I beg your pardon, these are exactly the people we want to come. The healthy don't need a doctor. It is the sick who need the doctor. So these people who have fallen from the Dharma, they need it more than any. So he was not a hypocrite. He wanted to set up the temples for worship and invite everyone. And the more that came, the better. And the more they soaked in, the better. Even though he said, when I was very young, I was very, very unsympathetic to evil people. Very unsympathetic. I used to be walking down the street of Calcutta, and if I saw a person of ill fame coming, I would go across the street and walk around them. I wouldn't even encounter them. He says, now I can live in the palaces and with kings and their concubines. See, I can sleep right in the same palace with them and nothing happens to me. I'm fine. So this idea of purity and impurity gets just transcended when you transcend the idea of Dharma and Adharma. In the meantime, Dharma and Adharma form a very powerful teaching, as you can see here by this teaching, with that kind of preamble about the avatar that launches us into this series of 4 classes, which is rather rare to hear talk about a divine incarnation, isn't it? I mean, you usually go and you hear the teachings, or you go to puja and maybe worship one of these avatars and don't hear any information about their lives. But here, not only are you going to hear about an avatar, you're going to hear from 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 of them, and what they say from age to age, and therefore form some sort of an understanding around who they are, what kind of souls they are. Like I was saying, Christ on the cross, did he suffer? He broke out in song. He said, "O Lord, why have you forsaken me?" And so people thought that he had lost his faith at facing death. But I was reminded by Lex Hickson, our founder, that was one of the most famous songs of the period in the hymnals. It was, "O Lord, why have you forsaken me?" So he was actually reminding people that death is an illusion, that you should not cling to it, that those who love their life will lose it, and those who hate their life will gain it back again in eternal life. However you want to put it, via the particular speak of any particular avatar of any religious tradition, you can draw these correlations. Like I said, Patanjali is saying avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, and abhinivesha. Those are the 5 obstacles to spiritual life. The first is ignorance of your true nature. The second is egotism. The third and fourth go together. They're attachment and aversion, raga, dvesha. But the fifth is abhinivesha, clinging to life, or fear of death. If you consider death to be real, then you're like a snake living in fear of a frog, when it should be having it for dinner. So to think about life as being the ultimate station and not having any idea about eternal life is not acceptable. So if you're in the periphery of the avatar, if you're in any given age, if you're close to an avatar or come just after the avatar has lived in the body, salokya it's called, then you may get this teaching fresh. And you'll hear Sarupa, you'll find out, Sarupa, I'm the same form as him. He and I were human together. We embodied the human station. I must say, and I heard our founder Lex Sixon say it again, I said about talking to him about future lives, and he said, well, you know, there are other lives to live besides human. It was as if he was thinking of some other station to occupy instead of the human body. Always interested in humanity, because humanity and the ancestors form this very large pool of souls who are in dire circumstance in Maya. Some of them, very noble, have come into Maya to take it on, to try and transcend it. Others have just come here to vacation. Others have come here just to suffer. That's what Vivekananda said. You don't understand about humanity, do you? Some are actually here to suffer. That's their main purpose for coming into the body. And there again, you could take that in many ways, couldn't you? They're here to suffer because of their karmas. They're here to suffer for the sake of others. You can go in many different directions with these teachings, and you should, so that you'll fill out all of that. You'll flesh out all of those vacant areas in your thinking consciousness and come to a fuller realization. Because when you meet the avatar face to face, as Sarupya in the same form, or Salokya in the same age, yuge, or Samipya, you feel like he's very dear to you, or she is very dear to you, and you're very dear to them, then you have the divine coupling going on. In India, they say, there are many beautiful relationships, none better than the guru and disciple. It's when there's an apt guru that can transmit the teachings and a true disciple who's sincerely on the trail of freedom, of getting free, then you have the best coupling in the world. Better than mother and son, which is, or parent and son and daughter. Even better than lover and beloved, they like it better. Because anyone who attains lover and beloved, they're not even considered anymore. The matter's over for them. But guru and disciple, if they see that operable in the human context, they know that there's the acid of truth at work there. And if one person can get enlightened, many people can follow. That's how much responsibility you have to your ancestors, for instance. I'm quite often found talking down the ancestors. I don't want to give you the impression that I don't like the ancestors. It's that I don't want to get into rounds of birth and death with them. I want to get enlightened so that 7 generations on either side of me will also have the possibility of getting enlightened. That's the teaching. And it's not like linear. It's like a layer cake. You're in the middle, and your ancestors and your children and so forth are on either side of you. If one person gets enlightened, then 7 generations of both sides, past and present, will get enlightened. That's the teaching. That's how powerful enlightenment is. It will spread through time, forward and backward, both. Because those souls who are living before are probably have taken on another body now, and you don't recognize them. Or they're still in an indeterminate state, about to take on another body. Imagine how much benefit you would be to them if all of a sudden you realized the truth. So the ancestors are a very worthy level of soul to contemplate, to come into knowledge of. So this being called the divine incarnation is aware of all strata. We say samipya, we say very dear. Everyone is very dear to that being, and that being is dear to everyone else. To those who are antagonistic to the avatar, then of course they will not understand. And his love is so unconditional that he's also going to include them in his scope. So he always comes back with a special eye on the evil beings, special eye on the suffering. That's why he's called Patita Pavana. A beautiful song, right? Ragapati Raghava Rajaram Patita Pavana Sita Ram. He's talking about Sita and Ram, the divine incarnation. Goes on, Sita Ram Jaya Sita Ram, and Ishvara Allah Tero Nam. So Ishvara and Allah, putting together the Hindu ideal and the Muslim ideal. This song was written there in India. And so the idea of Sri Ramchandra, the great avatar, being in company with Sita, the Divine Mother, hidden in form, is the Patita Pavana, the savior of the fallen and the lowly beings. And that's why they come. So again, some of those ideas around the introduction to this next 4 weeks of class, you're going to have to speak in terms of yuge, yuge, cha, dharma, sha. The Dharma as it appears to us age to age. This is a more of a stable teaching, though. The Dharma is going to change exteriorly. Maybe that's a given, depending on the situation of the people who are there and the kind of avatar who appears. That's why I often used to give this teaching, or say, some people think there are many avatars, and some people think there's just one, and he's going to return soon. But the real truth is, the avatar is just one, but it comes many times. And in order to, if you understood the Advaita philosophy, non-dualism, the devotion of non-separation, then you know that formless consciousness can take as many forms as it wants. That's why you should use your mind as an alambana. You want to know that all bodies came from your mind, not from nature. Nature was just a material out of which they got formed, but the mind was the congealing power. When the mind got in touch with nature and it saw the 5 elements there, and it says, I can fashion 5 senses out of that. Earth with smell, water with taste, fire with sight, and so forth. You make those connections. If you look back on them after they've already happened, that's also good. But it would be better to look at them and know them before you got into the body in the first place. That's called a past master. Dalai Lama coming 14 times would be an example of somebody who knew that process already. And so, I'm trying to take another body, go into my mind, fashion a body, find my parents, so forth and so on. And it's all a matter of consciousness. So those beings know the kingdoms of heaven like the back of their hand. You see, inside and out, up and down the amber stairs of birth and death, as Aurobindo put it. I have come up and down the amber stairs of birth and death. So back to the point, your mind produces bodies. It uses the 5 elements supplied by Maya and by nature. But in the mind itself is the congealing power, especially if you put 7 billion minds together, like on Earth here. Maybe a little bit low in my estimate right now. I haven't seen the most recent numbers. Or you talk about the billions of souls that are in the ancestor realm, in the kingdoms of heaven within. That's a whole other strata of humanity, your ancestors. And as far as Vivekananda is concerned, he used to say, the gods and the goddesses, they're just big men and women. They're just big men and women. They come down too and take a human form. Why? Because they have to transcend the desire to be gods and goddesses. Because the gods and goddesses are always warring with the asuras, you see, the negative forces, for dominion over lands, over beings, and over pleasures. Heaven is a place of increased pleasure. So those beings who are there at the level of the ancestors and the gods, which are 2 different strata of the kingdoms of heaven within you, are always at a warring faction, you see, trying to usurp the other, you see, and take on dominion. So yes, they're just big men and women. They have to be The human soul has the ability to go beyond that and to get enlightenment. But would do that by knowing. So one of those things you're going to have to know then, back to the main point, is that the mind produces bodies. Your subtle body produces gross bodies, and it can do so ad infinitum. And that can be a problem too. The desire to produce bodies is a big problem, because it becomes a desire. We were talking this morning after meditation about that, the idea of rebirth in name and form based on time, space, and causality. Ramakrishna had made that statement. The more lifetimes you live in ignorance, the more you come to consider the world to be real. Now that's a great Mahavakya out of the Gospel of Ramakrishna. When I saw that, I said, there's a marvelous one-sentence phrase. The more lifetimes you live in ignorance, the more you consider the world to be real. Well, let's check that out here, out in the world. Doesn't everyone consider the world to be real, the body to be real, the senses to be real, the objects to be real, and their pleasure to be real, until they start experiencing pain in turns with pleasure? And then maybe they don't wake up even then. Kamalkanta sings, it is time to heed the mother's minstrel, that's him, singing this song that death will come and snatch away your life's work in an instant. Just like that. So waking up to this presence of your precarious position, water on the lotus leaf, right? We sing that quite a lot. Nalini dalagata jalamati taralam tadvaji tipi atishaya chapalam vidhivyati abhimanagrastam lokam hatam sasamastram. Shokahatam cha samastam is actually the word. So basically those are those teachings of sorrow and suffering, and the water on the lotus leaf being very precariously balanced. So if there's just a little bit of a wind, and that water slides off, the upper water slides off the lotus leaf. He's using that as an analogy for human life, how precarious it is, here and gone. And we don't mean here today and gone to Maui. When we say that, say here today and gone to the ancestors. They're in a different land. So anyway, back to this idea, the more lives you live in ignorance, the more you'll consider the world to be real, till pretty soon the world is the only reality and God is the illusion. That's not the Vedantic dictum. The Vedanta dindima is Brahman Satya Jagad Mithya. Brahman is real, the world is unreal. So how did that get switched around? Well, let's just blame it on Maya, or the devil. But ultimately, we're going to have to blame it on our own self for believing Maya, believing the devil, for not looking deeper into the truth of the matter. Well, that truth of the matter is Dharma. If you can keep up a dharmic lifestyle, then you will stay on that cutting edge of spiritual life. We were saying this morning, there's worldly life, there's earthly life, there's intellectual life, there's religious life, but then there is spiritual life too. Spiritual life is the rarest of all commodities, of those cross-sections of different kinds of lifestyles to live. But in between religious life and spiritual life is dharmic life. Some of us are finding out about that thanks to Tibetan Buddhism coming to the West, and the work of different avatars to bring the Dharma current and forward through their followers from age to age, like from Ramakrishna to Vivekananda, and from Vivekananda to the extended family. That kind of work is commendable and laudable, and actually we're in full gratitude for it, because then we get to sit and listen to teachings like this and consider them. We get to be reminded of the truth. And if you shall know the truth shall set you free. Another good Easter teaching. So the Dharma here, you can see this gate. This gate was actually a photograph I took of a temple not far from Benares. And it's a gateway to a temple you're entering into, the Divine Mother. So I just took the picture of that and then Photoshop erased everything around it, telephone lines and various things that were going through there, as Indian style, as you know. So there's the three eternal gateways is how I wanted to use that as a teaching. And also to couple it with the four veiled doorways and the four fundamental paths of life. Those are all integrated here. Here's the four veiled doorways. Lokayatita Marga, materialism. Mitya Gyan Marga, fundamentalism. That is, there's some wisdom there, but it's veiled by narrowness. Pravritti Marg, secularism. And Bahutva Marg, religious convention. I had to look for Sanskrit equivalents to explain these, because these are well known in worldly life of the individual in America and in the West, and basically all countries where spirituality has not been awakened to. Awakening to spirituality is something quite rare and goes by individual soul rather than by cultures, at least at this day and time. So that four veiled doorways is a good teaching. There's the four fundamental paths of life next to it. Vyavaharika, worldly path. That falls under the Adharmic heading. So you can see Adharma, Dharma, and Swadharma. Remember, I've given that teaching often that duality is a closed door. You can't find a way out. Virtue, vice. You say, I'm going to be virtuous, but then you start thinking more about vice and vice versa. Pun intended. So basically this duality has to be added into with a triputi, with a third door. So Dharma and Adharma, back and forth you go. There's even songs about it that are worthy of looking into. Here's one by Kamalakanta. He says, Sharbanashi Dare Ashi Dharma Adharma Duto Keli Sharanandamai Kali Mahakalar Manomohini. Beautiful bhajan to Sharanandamai Kali. She's the bliss of Sat, truth. She's full of bliss and truth. Maya means full, actually. It's a word for fullness as well as for delusion or illusion. So he says here, the author of this song, Kamalakanta, says with a restless mind, you put to death Dharma and Adharma both with thy sword of wisdom. Sharbanashi, Daryashi, Dharma, Adharma, Duto Keli. You put to death, Nashi means death, this idea of righteousness and unrighteousness, Dharma and Adharma, with your shining sword of non-dual wisdom. So good to bring that up in terms of this word Swadharma. People go from Adharma to Dharma, hopefully, and from Dharma they're looking for their true calling. That's Swadharma. In Dharma you're still considering precepts, vows, but you're going to have to refine those with sadhana, with practice. And when you do, then you find your Swadharma. You find out what you were really meant to do, and it's surprising sometimes. Sometimes you find out what you're really meant to do is entirely different than what you were doing the first 20, 30, 40, or 50 years of your life. All of a sudden you find your true calling and you arrive. And that usually is attended by something of a spiritual nature. That's Swadharma. So that's why I wanted to refer you to that. And that's basically the teaching, but it can be fleshed out with these beautiful quotes. If we look under Adharma, we see this quote from the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam. It's one of the 2 or 3 mother scriptures of the world. There are very few divine mother scriptures of the world, but the Chandi, the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, those are several of them. They're very precious. Here's an excerpt I found in the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, which is a book about that thick and that big. It's a huge teaching. She says, this is the mother herself, in an age of darkness, viciousness and vile acts become the normal code of behavior. Even the gods become deceitful, what to speak of humans and lower creatures. It is natural that injury come to those who injure others. But when peaceful persons devoid of enmity are injured, that is an act of wickedness, pure and simple. In such an age, one will find very few persons following the true Dharma. Sounds like this day and age, this earth, doesn't it? Very few people even seeking out what the true Dharma is, what to speak of following it, or even worse than that, never even knowing that there's such a thing as Dharma in the first place. Being an adharmi and not knowing it. Having all his good intentions, but actually working for under the veil of darkness. It's quite common to do that. So it takes consciousness to rise out of the Adharma and get to the Dharmic level of things. If you've arrived at the Dharma, then you've made a huge step inward towards your spiritual enlightenment. And if you can abide in the Dharma and keep it constant day to day and consider everything from that level, then you've really won your salvation. But beyond salvation is liberation. Liberation will mean Swadharma. Let's look at some of the teachings around that. Lord Vashishta has some good ones in Vashishta's Yoga. He says, that intrepid spiritual wayfarer who inquires into the wise characteristics of Dharma, he treads the proper path. He learns concentration and meditation, the significance of the scriptures, discrimination between the real and the unreal, and knows what actions are to be done and which are to be given up. If you read the Bhagavad Gita in the first 4 chapters, you pretty much find what Krishna says about not giving up certain kinds of actions. They're called obligatory actions. Those you keep, your duty, your dharma, you keep those. All others you give up. So you don't have this unholy admixture of things that are ill-considered and things that are well-considered, because then it will affect the fruits of those things that are well-considered. You'll be putting a damper on your best intentions and on your highest aspirations. You'll be putting a damper on that. So he pretty much hands out the formula for Dharma right there, doesn't he? You learn concentration and meditation. How few people do that. And then the significance of the scriptures. Less and less people are looking into the scriptures now. I was talking to the president of Advaita Ashrama in India, this beautiful monk, who was very helpful to SRV and a great friend. And he said, yeah, we sell a lot of books, hundreds, thousands of books monthly, and we've noticed a decline in those interest in the scriptures. So those non-dual scriptures, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutras, Ashtavakra Samhita, Avadhuta Gita, Adhyatma Ramayana, there are a whole host of non-dual scriptures that really give you the essence of life. They're really talking above the Dharma when you read them. They're talking Swadharma. They're trimming all the non-essence away and just leaving you with the essence. And that does have to work for you. It's like Ramakrishna saying, be like an ant. If you put down a mixture of sand and sugar, then the ant finds it. And then you come back later and there's just a bunch of granules of sand, and they've taken all the sugar. So when you read the scriptures, you have to take the essence and leave the non-essence out. That's discrimination, and it's what he talks about next, discrimination between the real and the unreal. That's in your actions, that's in your study, and that's in your meditation. Viveka is also Viveka Dhyan. It's also Viveka Gyan. And it's also Viveka Karma Dhyan, as you meditate on your actions day to day. And so it applies in all 3 of those levels, body, energy, and mind. You have to have discrimination. We were talking about that for over an hour this morning after meditation and after satsang. And then finally, what actions are to be done and what are not to be done. If you want to look into Yoga Vashishta, he often speaks about that. Guess who he's speaking to? Sri Ramachandra, the earliest avatar. He was a young boy in his teens when he went to Lord Vashishta, and Lord Vashishta was a graybeard. And so Lord Vashishta had this onerous but very privileged boon of teaching the avatar of the age, reteaching, you might say, the avatar of the age, these great teachings. You can also find teachings of what to do and what not to do in the last 3 or 4 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. How to give gifts in the right way, what foods to eat, what foods not to eat. Krishna saves those all toward the end of the Gita and mixes them in with the gunas, the teaching of Rajas, Sattva, and Tamas. How to do actions sattvically, not rajasically in restlessness, and not tamasically in sloth, but do them all sattvically. And the same with your thoughts. Have only sattvic thoughts, get rid of the restless thoughts, get rid of the heedless thoughts, see, brooding. And also acts. So you'll find that all listed very nicely at the end of the Bhagavad Gita by this avatar of the Treta Yuga. Now, other quotes here about the Vyavaharika. Shankara says, meditation on the meaning of truth as it is taught in the Vedanta leads to the highest illumination. By this means, the misery of worldly life, Vyavaharika, is destroyed altogether. So imagine, if you will, a state of mind that is attended only by peace, subtle bliss, balance, harmony, and sometimes very deep visions in meditation. And you'll come to know more of the Dharmic person. The Dharmic person, at least the way we've seen them in India, and how it contrasts the Western people who are trying to attain Dharma, is that the Hindus, for instance, love their children, but they're ready to put their children away when it comes to meditation and retreat. The Westerners aren't. They cannot get them out of their mind. And they cannot get their acts out of their mind. They cannot get their money out of their mind. And they cannot get all of these other levels of Maya and even practical life out of their mind. They don't understand that if they can just get those out of the mind for a little while, that they will have a perfect position with which to re-encounter them when they come back to them. So you go away from cell phones, and you go away from children, you go away from your wife or husband if they're not in step with your spiritual life, and you put yourself completely samadhana, focus on reality alone. You sharpen the mind like an arrow with thoughts on reality alone, and then you aim it toward the target and you pierce it. The target is the imperishable Brahman. And once you get that, you can come back to all those same things again: objects, thoughts, actions, people, relationships, and you'll be perfectly in tune with handling them. And basically that's pretty much a description between Adharma and Dharma. Adharma isn't necessarily just outright evil in this age. The real evil in this age, according to Ramakrishna, is worldliness. He says it's a chronic disease that has taken over everyone. So in old ages, other yugas, it was evil. Not that we don't have some very evil people around nowadays and doing some very evil things, but what is keeping those evil people from pushing the button? You know what I mean? Nuclear war. What's keeping them from doing that? Pleasure. They're getting too many good things from us for their own pleasure. I think I'll destroy America now. Well, let's see. I really like that TV show. What's it called? You see. So the great dictators, that take their hands away from the button, that's Maya's purpose, you see. That's Divine Mother's safety zone. She's got them all trapped in Maya. And they're not going to sacrifice. A sacrifice is for the avatar to do. Ishvara. Streaks of blood are running down her beautiful black form, like crimson flowers floating on black waters. That's Kali, a song about Kali. So some songwriter sat and meditated on Kali. That's what that means. That means sacrifice. She's always sacrificing for her precious spiritual children. Doesn't it sound like Dharma? Doesn't it sound like why the avatars come to earth? To uphold the sadhakas? Because if they're given a teaching like that, then they know the true meaning of sacrifice, and they begin to have appreciation for the sacrifice, gratitude for the sacrifice, and pretty soon they can be cut in the image of sacrifice. That's called yagya in Sanskrit. It's a huge word to unwrap. Dharma is a huge word, yagya almost bigger. How to do the act of sacrifice consciously for the good of all beings. Very, very rare and very, very powerful form of austerity. Tapas. So we just chanted, Labis tapasa hesa atma samyagineda brahmacharya nityam. You get realization of the Atman through continence, moderation, austerity, knowledge, and veracity. All of those constantly cultivated. That's Dharma. Dharma is practice, or at least the doorway leading to practice, because Dharma stops, and you could also call this the doorway between these two gateways, is called sadhana. Spiritual practice. That defines you from the worldly. That also defines you from the intellectual, from, say, the professor. The difference between a teacher, a guru, and a professor. It also defines you differently from even the Dharmic people. Because the Dharmic people have found the wisdom, and they're living in the wisdom, but they haven't started practicing it yet, in many cases. So sadhana is the doorway in between those two gateways, I would say. Vyavaharika, then, the worldly path, Shankara brings that out as a teaching. Now you can see here that Adharma has Vyavaharika as one of its components, but Dharma has these two as its components. Dualism and transformation. Dualism, we were saying this morning again, is very rich. That is, I and my Father are two, is a very rich path. Again, sometimes you hear us talking so much about Advaita in spiritual life in India, in Dharma, in SRV and so forth, that you think, oh, dualism must be something I got to transcend. But there's a lot of people living in dualistic. It's not fundamentalistic, as we've already talked about that as being one of the Michigyan paths, right? One of the Adharmic paths. Narrow fundamentalism is not what we mean when we use that term, dualism. Advaita in India has always been that man and God are two separate things, but guess what? God exists. Dualism here, like, say, the rock and a hard place between science and the theologians, God does not exist in one of them. And in the other, the kind of God that is existing is becoming very questionable. I don't think I'd want to believe in a God that sent me to an eternal damnation, you see. So, in the West, it's hard to find a real honest-to-goodness dualism that you can feel good about, you see. But in India, Hanuman and Ram, you see, Krishna and Balaram, you find these divine relationships, whether they be between two males, a male and a female, or two females, whatever the case may be, or transgender, you'll find them peppering the field of dualism, Advaita. So we must say about Advaita that it's very rich in its offerings. So that's why it's classed under Dharma in India, as one of the eternal gateways. Also, yoga has to be classed there. Yoga, it's very, I had a hard time deciding in this chart whether I would put yoga under the Advaitic or under the Vishishta Advaitic category, but I thought yoga basically is transformation by getting a hold of your energy and bettering yourself. That doesn't happen in Advaita. You're already perfect. You don't need to better yourself. You can't use that as an excuse not to do the sadhana and do the work. That's not the point, because a lot of people make that mistake. But nevertheless, you cannot turn the Advaita into a path of transformation, because Brahman does not transform. It's already pure and perfect from the get-go. I was going to say in its inception, but it has no inception, see? So you can't really start explaining it or talking about it. It's a pure and perfect state always at hand. And the human being must rise to it, as we were just saying, out of matter, out of fundamentalism, out of narrow religious considerations, even out of worldly paths and intellectualism. It must rise to understand it. It's going to have to take a upward trajectory or an inward trajectory, what we used to call inward ascension back in the old days. Inward ascension. Because if we say ascension, you're starting to look up, and say, oh, is God up there somewhere? No. There's just the 5 elements up there, and probably 2 of them are in scarce demand. Here we have all 5. Up there, probably only 3 in most places so far. So you don't look up that kind of ascension for God. You don't pray up. You pray inward always in India. And Christ meant you to do that too. Kingdom of heaven is within you, so you pray inwards if you're going to pray at all. And the further inwards you go, as Vivekananda said, pretty soon you only find the self, yourself. That's all you find. Ancestors go away, gods and goddesses go away. Even the Trinity goes away. That's why Ram has the Om sign painted there, because he wants you into the formless condition. You go into it every night in deep sleep. Why don't you go into it consciously in meditation then, and see how that differs from deep sleep? Because deep sleep, you go in a fool and you come out a fool. But in meditation, you can go in a fool and come out an enlightened soul if you see what's in there, the light of deep sleep. Formlessness is there. And it's a formlessness that's not empty. It's empty of form. And it's empty of name. And it's empty of suffering. And it's empty of duality. That's a nice emptiness, you see. Does that sound like the old school way of defining shunyata? No. This is the cutting edge of shunyata. This is the kind of emptiness you're going to be looking forward to, because there's no problems and no worries in deep sleep, and you're feeling blissful. Blissful. Peaceful. I was walking through the health food store just yesterday, and all of a sudden, through all of the din and everything, came this Beatles song. Give you everything I got for a little peace of mind. And then some drum roll by Ringo, see. flashing you back to the 60s. Give you everything I've got for a little peace of mind, you see. So that's what you're experiencing there in deep sleep. And also some subtle bliss. And that peace and bliss will also pervade your waking state if you bring it back down. And to bring it here in the world, since suffering is and peace is not here, is a very difficult proposition for any aspirant. That's why the teaching of Dharma and Adharma. You're going to have to put to death both of them to get to that kind of level of consciousness. Well, that's why a little bit around this idea of yoga, path of transformation, they want you on that, unless you already understand non-duality, which is a very rare cross-section of human souls. They want you on the path of yoga. It is the darshana of transformation. It's how you transform yourself. And a self that's already pure and perfect, yes, but you're really talking about this self, ego self, mind self, not the Atman self or Buddha nature self. That's already a given, pure and perfect. But this can't see that yet. So if you make your eye single, which is right there in the center of the forehead, which is right where the mind and brain complex is, then you can see that truth, and the truth will, so forth and so on. You see, on Easter, will set you free. Whether it's in deep sleep, death, meditation, or samadhi, those are the 4 times when you're courting freedom. Freedom might as well be the same as formlessness. So, Swadharma then, what is Swadharma about? I could say a lot more about the yoga of transformation, but you just must come to one of my retreats on yoga. We'll look at the 8-limbed yoga, because I have a very strong penchant for it. I mean, I used to say, you look at Sri Ramakrishna and you see Tantra embodied, and you look at Vivekananda and you see Vedanta embodied. But I'm a yogi, see. And that's where how I've made my way in spiritual life, is through yoga. So that's why I don't like to see it replaced by hatha. Hatha, as hatha is fine, but don't call it yoga. Yoga is something entirely different than hatha. It has a little bit of hatha in it, but it's got 7 other limbs that you're not looking at yet. And that's why what they want you on, the path of transformation, because breathing exercises in hatha yoga have not transformed us. They've made our bodies a little healthier, maybe, made our lungs a little bit more capacity to breathe in and out. But that's still life, isn't it? That one who loves his life shall lose his life. So what about eternal life? How can I get that? That's 7 other limbs of yoga that's leading me to samadhi, which is a sure and certain death of ignorance, if I were to climb that tree of yoga. So I could say a lot more about that, but let's finish this chart up, and possibly this half, with this final quote on Advaita, the way of non-dual abidance. Shiva says, "The true renouncer, called the great actor and the great enjoyer, has transcended both Dharma and Adharma and gotten free of birth and death." This is in the Yoga Vasishtha scripture again, that he says this story about Parameshvara Shiva and his disciple talking to him. So he's also proclaiming this synthesis, integration, transformation of two-ness into oneness, and being there to watch it happen. Like we were saying this morning, slowing the process down so you could actually see how transformation is taking place. Because once you see it, then you'll know the dynamics of inner life. You'll know what the subtle body and the causal body are doing to produce the gross body. You'll know what the A is doing to produce the U, and the U is doing to produce the M, and the M is doing away with to produce the next A in the cycle, Om, right? And that's called a yuga. Yuge chadharmasya. The avatar knows about this because he's watching the yugas go by. That's why Buddha is one of the avatars to us. Call him a Buddha. I mean, we could say Muhammad is an avatar of Islam, but they don't really like the idea. They like prophet better. So he was a prophet or a messenger, because the idea there is that man cannot be God. But the Indian Advaita has a different way of looking at that. In fact, Vivekananda said, man is just God walking around on 2 legs. That's how he put it. And the sooner we recognize that, the better for all of us. So whatever the case may be, same with Moses, a messenger, not necessarily an avatar, but we're using avatar in this next series of 4 classes to indicate that supremely sublime soul who has this knowledge in spades and who can transmit it to others, and who comes again and again from age to age to do so at great sacrifice to him or herself. Mostly him, because her is always in the background making this happen, this Divine Mother. And that to me is the real import of Ramakrishna's descent in the 1800s. I didn't finish that teaching, basically. He came, number one, to bring the Divine Mother teachings. Number two, the universality of all religions. He's not, somebody has come now who not only professes that all the religions are true, but has proved it by his own practice. He found the enlightenment in Muslim religion, he found enlightenment in the Tantra, he found enlightenment in the Vedanta, and in the Christian tradition too. He saw Christ and had that realization. So these are his own experiences. Avatar is a quick study, as we often say. So in this march of universalism, you see it's been at the very warp and woof of India's thinking from its very inception. That is basically Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedanti. Ekam Sat, one truth, Vipra Buddha Vedanti, called by different names. So that's the most ancient saying about universal religion in any scripture, in any religious tradition, the Rig Veda, carbon dated earliest, even if you want that kind of proof. But as far as historicity is concerned, that was the first great declaration of the universality of all religions. And it came from a country who is the mother of all religions. Does that mean that she's the best? It means that she never had one prophet in one book. She never limited herself. She had hundreds and dozens of each. And, the 6 darshanas start off proving that. There's yoga and Vedanta and Tantra and Buddhism and Samkhya and Nyaya and Vaisheshika and then there's Sikhism and Jainism and other great religions that are there as products of Mother India's long-standing evolution, spiritually speaking, religiously speaking, dharmically speaking. So this is why so many avatars have come out of India, is another way of putting it. And they're still coming. And not just avatars, you have saints, seers, yogis, rishis, avadhuts, siddhas, munis, sages, and so forth, vibhutis. There are some Ishvarakotis, there's so many names of this different level of realized soul. So we know there's different levels of ignorant souls. Intellectual people can be very ignorant, so we can't call them enlightened yet. The difference between Einstein and Ramakrishna is vast. They both believe in God, but one realized God. The other one was talking all the time about relativity. Where is there any mention in science about reality? It's all about relativity, have you noticed? I'm sorry, there's an opposite here that you're not looking at. Relativity has an opposite, like everything else. It's called reality. What is the reality of a thing? It's not changing sand, shifting sand, changing particles. That's relativity. You got that right. So you can talk about God, but to realize God is a different thing. You have to spend some time in the Dharma, sussing out the deepest level of the teachings and make yourself a realized soul. Get into a state of illumination. Sharpen your thoughts and use them as an arrow to penetrate Maya and hit the mark of Brahman. As out of the Mundaka Upanishad. Mundaka Upanishad says that. So, a teaching around Dharma, Adharma, and Swadharma to get us rolling on this series of classes. Let's take 15 minutes now while the live streaming audience, welcome by the way, can look at this chart up close on their computers, and the rest of us can take a little refreshment and a little bit of reflection and come back in 15 minutes for the second half. Aloha, namaste. Om Sato Ma Sadgamoya Tamaso Ma Joitir Gamoya Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamoya Abira Bira Mayeti Rudrayate Dakshinamukam Tenamam Pahinicham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. Krishna Dasayam. Hamsaya Vidmahe Paramahamsaya Dhimahi Tano Hamsa